The Big 12 is selling itself off to venture capitalists, which couldn't go wrong, right? This is a Locked On Big 12 Locked On Kansas State crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12 Locked On Kansas State crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day, and you're probably mixing into that rotation. Christian Rauh of Locked On Kansas State. We're going to start with the Big 12 selling itself to a venture capital group. That might not be the best idea ever. We'll also get into West Virginia, Kansas State, Iowa State, dropping out of Division I because they can't afford it in a revenue-sharing era of college football. Is that a real thing? I don't think so. Also, new rule that specifically pertains to the SEC, no more faking injuries. We're going to take 8 minutes to say all of the meanest things we can possibly conjure up about that conference. If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. This from Ross Dellinger. Big 12 presidents and athletic directors reviewed bids from 3 finalists in the league's pursuit of a capital partner. Sources told Yahoo Sports firms are proposing to infuse millions to schools. Redbird Capital has emerged as the leader. A decision is expected in the coming weeks. Christian, the Big 12 needs money. We are behind the SEC. We're behind the Big 10. We know that. The ACC likes to tout that it's saving money with SMU paying them to be there. And, these half shares or quarter shares, whatever it is for Stanford and Cal. For the Big 12, you've got to get creative. But I'm not sure if I remember the last time a venture capitalist jumped into a room and made things better for everybody 10, 15, 20 years down the line.
Yeah, usually when you think private equity, you don't really think of success, at least in the eyes of them coming in to save the day, right? I didn't think when we were talking of Big 12, we'd also be thinking that we'd be learning that their new phone number is 877 cash now, with JG Wentworth coming into play here, because that's what it seems like. But to be completely honest, it sounds like, in my opinion, I think that you can like this idea, but still think it's also a very stupid idea as well, because I think it's long overdue. If you're going to try and compete with everybody else, with the rev shares, whatever the case may be, when you're talking about that numbers coming in, the Big 12 is going to have to compete. We've already seen how they don't do very well with how, like, for example, how ESPN's not giving the love the Big 12 deserves. Commissioner Brett Yormark came out and said that he doesn't like that stuff. You have to find a way to get a strategic advantage. And unfortunately, money is the way to do that. But overall, in my initial thoughts of this is, yes, it's long overdue. You find a way for them to succeed, but you're kind of also trading in future cash flow for cash now at really a discounted rate. So that's where I think the JG Wentworth kind of situation comes in. You're hoping for success right away, but you're going to hurt yourself in the future if this doesn't go right, especially.
One of the Ross Dellinger points from maybe a year ago with Yahoo Sports talked about the Big 12 and private equity, bringing in Allstate, bringing in somebody as a sponsor of the league. And to me, if you do that, if you call it the Allstate 12 and you start to sell off these sponsorship spots where, hey, we're going to put your logo on the field at everybody's stadium at the Big 12 championship, it'll be the Allstate Big 12 championship. And they're going to give us, a $1 billion contract for 10 years or whatever it might be for this massive brand deal. In my opinion, great, awesome. Put as many logos and stickers on things as you want. Put an Allstate logo on the jersey if it means now Big 12 schools can ultimately have the money it takes to compete in college sports. This is a conversation that isn't related to that, though. This isn't a, hey, Allstate's going to come in as our sponsor. It's instead this investment group, this capitalist group, is going to give our schools millions of dollars, and then what's the interest? What do we pay back? How do we make that money back? Can we guarantee that the Big 12 can put itself in a spot where, especially with the SEC and the Big 10 taking over the college football playoff format from 2026 to 2031, can we find a way to make money and make this deal work? Christian, I just don't think that risk can pay off.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I don't think it can pay off. And then you're also talking about there's a new hand in the mix, another person holding a stack of cards with the interest of the Big 12. What do they actually want? Why are they giving that type of money to a conference? What are they looking for as well? And we all obviously have seen the dynamic and the culture of college football change. It's not just it's not just the diehard of fans of college football getting the benefit from this. And to be completely honest, I think it's the complete opposite. With the way these media rates have changed, the way that this new money flow is coming in, they're focused towards the fair weather fan. They're not focused towards us diehards like we are in this conference. And to me, I don't see it being overall a successful plan when it's all said and done, at least in the eyes of a diehard fan like myself. And I know for you as well, I just don't see it being something good for us to be looking in the future saying, yeah, that was a good idea.
Yeah. Are you a big fan of venture capitalists? You met any of those that you've enjoyed recently? You know, to me, if you put your concentrated efforts, and I just bought a house, right? If Allstate said, hey, we want our logo on your roof, we'll give you 50 grand. That I could not get the logo on there fast enough. I don't care. That's great. Put the patches on the jerseys, and now we can stay alive. You know, now my house becomes a lot cheaper. It's the venture capitalist side. It's the what, and you hit the nail on the head too. It's not just the how do we make this valuable for them. That's what they ultimately want. It is also we, the Big 12, want to make a decision, and now this random company sitting at the table with us, and they have a say. They have some sort of sway of like, yeah, we don't want to move that direction. Oh, yeah, we don't think that adding this school in realignment is going to be the right way to work. So Brett Yormark, who wants to add a UConn in basketball in a couple of years, can't do that without some capitalist company having a direct response, a direct, control. I would say control. Direct control over what Brett Yormark does. To me, you pigeonhole yourself just asking for money on the front end. I understand loans. I understand that can be like, I couldn't have bought a house without one. But Christian, I've never met a venture capitalist who wasn't in this for the venture to make the money. And it feels like that's what the Big 12 would be running into.
Look, we run into the situation with like head coaching firings, right? Like, for example, with Neil Brown in West Virginia, just this past few years, with donors talking about how they either want to keep the head coach or move on from the head coach. It's not just a West Virginia problem. We saw it with Florida State with Mike Norvell for lots of years as well. The donors have their hand in this mix. Now think of if a private equity has their hand in the entire conference, and then it's eventually going to turn into the entire league of college football. Because if the Big 12's doing it, and unfortunately it means that other teams, other conferences are also going to be doing it as well. You can bet that the SEC is going to try and do this if they haven't already. We've already seen the ACC with certain teams like Florida State try this in the past as well. This isn't something that's going to go away. I just don't know if it's the right move, especially right now.
Yeah, coming up, West Virginia, Kansas State, Iowa State dropping out of the Big 12 and Division I altogether. That was kicked around recently. I don't think it's going to happen. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Kansas State crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, today's show is brought to you by Rauh. Attention Locked On Big 12 fans, if you ever wished you could directly support your favorite Big 12 athlete, be a part of their journey, now you can with Rauh, the NIL app that puts fans in control. Before Rauh, NIL deals were handled behind closed doors, and fans like you didn't have a clear way to directly support the players you love. Now with Rauh, you can make a real impact. You feel closer to the athletes representing our conference. With Rauh, you get to choose the player you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, get exclusive content straight from the athletes. And the best part, if your player transfers, you get the money back, risk-free. And it's a way to show your support and make your voice heard. Support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of Big 12 sports. Download the Rauh app today from the App Store and start backing Big 12 athletes the way they deserve. With transparency, trust, and real impact, this is the future of college sports. Join now by downloading Rauh and supporting your favorite players with Rauh. Christian Rauh, Locked On Kansas State. This is a tweet. I want to give some context to this of West Virginia, Iowa State, other schools in the Big 12, specifically public schools, dropping out of Division I altogether because of the money that's asked, the $22 million in revenue sharing, and the way that NIL and the transfer portal have wrecked all of college athletics. We understand schools are going broke. Will they drop out of D1? That was a quote that the Big East commissioner gave, is that this could be an option for some universities that can't afford it. Then a tweet from Sky is this person's account, who accused Kuz, who's a big Greg Flugar, a couple of the guys who are on the Big 12 Mafia channel, of saying that West Virginia is likely going to drop out of Division I. They can't afford upcoming Power 4 landscape with revenue share, NIL, coaching budgets ballooning. Come to find out, that quote was not featured in the Big 12 Mafia channel, but it did spark a massive conversation of how legitimate this could be. Can schools afford to stick around? The example I usually give, Jamie Pollard at Iowa State. He has been very public that they had to cancel a new wrestling facility and improvements to Hilton Coliseum because they're saving money to give the student athletes coming forward. These schools are going broke. Missouri, their basketball coach is pulling a microphone during a game and saying, "Don't storm the court. We need the money. We can't afford this." Public schools that aren't Ohio State, that aren't Alabama, that aren't LSU, are by and large going broke over the way the NCAA, the way the United States government is directing them to pay student athletes going forward. Do you see a world where schools that can't afford to keep up with what college football is now demanding will have to cut back entirely on athletics to the point where D1, the Big 12, the bright lights aren't viable for them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a space race, and I'm not talking UCF in this case, but it's really just the fact of moving forward and finding always ways to compete.
UCF and Houston. Just going to throw that out there. They'll get mad.
Absolutely.
They'll get mad.
Yep, you're right. And I should make sure that this played in there. But no, you're always finding a way to compete and making sure that you are the better one, the one that's there first or even has the better facilities, because not only are you utilizing the same George Washingtons and everybody else to make sure that you are bringing in those players, but you also have to entice them as well. And we're noticing that that's just a really tough thing to do, to compare and compete against some of those top public schools, as you mentioned. I thought this quote really brought in some interesting dialogue, and I know that wasn't exactly the quote that was said on the show, but it really did, really spark some interest, as you mentioned. My mind did shift to those new schools that just entered from the G5 to the Power 4 conferences, like Cincinnati, like UCF. That would be potentially ones at risk. But I think West Virginia is one of those schools that you would have to pay attention to, watch out for. Iowa State, I mean, even Kansas State, although they're made a step forward with their NIL budget this past year, especially on the basketball side. Avery Johnson tied for 24th, according to On3, of the most paid player in NIL, $1.8 million. It's just, there's a lot of people, a lot of teams that are going to struggle with keeping up with, dare I say, the Ohio States and Alabamas. It's not a tough thing, or not an easy thing to do, Drake.
No, not at all. And there will be universities that have to find public schools specifically. Baylor is a unique case because they're being a private school. They can do a lot. They have a lot more flexibility to dictate how they spend their money, with the federal government a lot less worried about where the Bears, where TCU put those dollars. And they also have Drake McClain, who owned the Houston Astros for a long time and can dump money into the university, and the government doesn't really have the opportunity to look at that the same way they would a major donor at Oklahoma State or at Kansas State. So my worry is not about these private schools, about SMU or a Baylor or Notre Dame. It's instead about Kansas State, West Virginia. I mean, states that are going to struggle to support major universities and be able to help pay these bills. As it sits for Kansas State, especially with Kansas being right there, you're trying to support, as a more blue collar area, support two major universities. Is there enough money to be comfortable, if you're Kansas State, moving forward in the direction college athletics is going?
Right now, it seems like it's okay, but I feel like I would not be doing any service if I said that in the longevity standpoint, there's a huge concern about the potential of maybe not being able to keep up. Because right now you think you're doing okay. You saw with the basketball side, they were willing to spend, like a Coleman Hawkins, $2 million just to come for 1 year to Manhattan. As I already mentioned with Avery Johnson, you've been willing to spend that money to make it happen. But how long can that keep going? And I think we're going to see that not only with Kansas State, you're going to see it with other teams in the Big 12 as well. Going back to this quote in this conversation, the Big 12 Mafia with West Virginia, he mentions the big promotion, the big money change with the defensive coordinator. The old defensive coordinator is making about $700,000 a year. Now it's making 1.5. That's a double in price just for your coordinator, and that's a huge change. So not only are you going to be able to not be able to pay your players, but now you have to worry about your coaching staff as well. There's a lot of issues that you have to continue to build on. And if you're not bringing in enough money to continue paying on this inflated rate, And I know you're sick of hearing about inflation. I mean, have you seen the price of eggs lately? It's not the only thing that's happening in the world, Drake, that's rising in prices. Things like this with athletics and coaching staffs are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm not happy with where college athletics is going from the standpoint of universities themselves, like Kansas State, struggling in comparison to an Ohio State. That gap is only going to widen now. And this even kind of goes back to our original conversation about, selling off to a venture capital group if you're the Big 12. Finding unique ways to make money is going to be key. If you are Kansas State University, sponsored by Allstate, again, I'm okay with that. I have no issue if it keeps you alive and keeps you on the forefront. But we are in an era, and it blows my mind a little bit, where Avery Johnson is making more money than his offensive and defensive coordinator. That's
and it's
a
bananas
lot for me. That's a lot for me to like process. That's just how.
Yeah, and he's going to be going into his second full season as quarterback. Now, obviously, he would have been highly sought after as a quarterback elsewhere if he would have entered the transfer portal, and there's a reason behind why they threw money at him. But I do think there's a better strategy behind it of why you should spend a certain money. And by no means am I saying that they shouldn't have paid Avery Johnson, but I think you got to find better ways to be creative with the money that you're not going to have as much of compared to the Alabamas and the Notre Dames with these huge budgets and huge donor lists. And although the government is changing the way that NIL and how the collectives are going to be looked at, you're still, and although we're also seeing a lot more parity in this league as well, and when I mean league, I mean the entire nation in sports, there's still going to be this huge disconnect and this huge gap between where we sit right now and where those top 5 programs in the country are. And I don't know if right now, even with private equity, if that can be adjusted.
Yeah, there are like 10 schools that can win a national championship in football. That's pretty much the 10 that are going to have the opportunity to do it moving
forward. And it's all money, right? And it's all money.
Yep. Yes, unless you're Oregon. And for some reason, you should be in that 10, and you're just kind of not. Like you have Nike, but you still can't. Coming up, there's a new rule proposed that I hope passes, and it would just doom the SEC. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Kansas State crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Why? Because of course it is. FanDuel is exactly where I go during the NBA or college basketball season. I've been in Miami the entire weekend, and the Heat were playing. I want to throw some money on the Heat versus the Spurs. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. Even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet the fourth quarter comeback, you can. If you're looking for a great payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love the live betting feature because it's the fourth quarter and my favorite team's down by 5, and I just know they're going to come back. I can still put a wager on the game with FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Christian Rauh of Locked On Kansas State. There is a new rule proposal in college football that would absolutely kill the SEC. This could be the downfall entirely of their conference. I'm not sure how they could exist after this, namely a couple of their programs. This from Chris Vanini. The rule is written that the committee has identified the time period after the ball has been spotted as the most egregious violations of the injury timeout rule and is addressing the issue this way. That's a quote from Kirby Smart on this new rule proposal saying any injury after the ball is spotted will cost a timeout to discourage faking. This is what I would like to dub the SEC rule. It is very commonly known that, and this is on top of other rules that have been pitched, like if the defense has 12 players on the field, 5-yard penalty, and the offense can reset the clock. After that Oregon game, they also proposed only one timeout after the third overtime period. Those, whatever. But faking an injury is something I don't think I've seen once in the Big 12. We just kind of play the game. But for it to just mean more in the SEC, I think this is going to crumble their core pillars. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting. And it's actually really crazy that the person that said this quote was head coach Kirby Smart of the SEC. You would totally think it'd be like maybe like a Ryan Day or someone making this quote, but it was not. So maybe Kirby Smart's on his way out at the SEC. Maybe we have
If
some
Chris
rumors.
Kleiman, if Kleiman said this, I'd be like, yes, Chris, you're blue collar, you get it. But if Lane Kiffin or Kirby Smart are like, I'm sick and tired of the injuries being a big problem, like, you do this, you actively do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's going to be interesting what happens with this, because there are obviously injuries that happen, and that is going to cause the biggest issue and the biggest controversy when it does occur, because you only have 3 timeouts. And what I've looked at through the comments of this tweet is if you don't have any timeouts left, it's going to wind up being a delay of game penalty. It's going to change the way that football is played, and not just in the SEC, but most definitely in the SEC more than any other conference, because they do it quite a lot. But there are injuries that occur in games, and it's going to impact the Big 12. It's going to impact when it occurs, and it makes the strategy change, especially in the second half when those timeouts are gold, liquid gold, Drake, and you lose them because with 14 minutes left in the third quarter, somebody pulls a hamstring and can't get off the field in time. Like that's a tough goal. It's a tough sell.
So my biggest question here, and somebody commented, "Oh, this certainly won't cause any issues." How do we police it? Because this is going to happen immediately. The first game of the season is going to be like Austin Peay playing Western Kentucky, and some kid's going to go down after the ball is spotted, and the referee is going to charge Western Kentucky a timeout. MRI comes back, his meniscus is completely torn, and that will cause absolute outrage. My biggest question mark here is, how will the officials determine what is a real post-ball being spotted injury and what is fake? Because that subjectivity could end in an absolute firestorm.
Here, that's where you get to it. Like you talk about refs' discretion here. How much discretion do we want to still continue to give the refs, right? Do we want to let them make those decisions, or do we want to keep it black and white? Because to be honest with you, we might want to just keep that rule as is, saying if you do this, then this shall happen. Because if we give the refs more of this opportunity to make that decision on the field, I think that might bring even more criticism to if it was just a black and white rule. I've seen some certain comments saying that you should only let, if players are truly injured, that they either have to, the team has to take a timeout, or the change of possession has to happen. That's an interesting situation. I don't know if that is something they go down to, because that would just be a micromanagement headache, in my opinion. You'd have to actually make an entire tracker for something like that. But overall, I think that there isn't any way to mediate to fix this rule in the eyes of how do you make sure that serious injuries or them faking it. I think the only way that you do it is as it's written right now. You kind of have to just go black and white. Don't let the refs have any more say in the fact than they already do.
And this will change the way that players go down. Now it is, hey, if you think you're hurt, go down immediately before the ball is spotted. Like just stay. Yeah. If you even maybe have tweaked your meniscus, just sit on your butt so that we don't have to. And often you'd see like Lane Kiffin yelling at players to go down on the field. This is going to change the way that players play the game.
Which coaches value timeouts? Does Lane Kiffin value timeouts? Because if he does, then it's going to change. But if he doesn't, then maybe you still see him tell him to go down. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe that's not going to be the case. But obviously, it's going to make a big difference, because you're going to want to save those timeouts. You're going to want to make sure, especially when you're in some really tough games. There's really tough games on the schedule in the Big 12, and there's tough games and interesting rivalries in the SEC as well. But you're going to want to make sure you have those timeouts. They change the game. There's a reason you only get 3 of them. And if you lose them because somebody's faking an injury after the ball is spotted, which to me, there's enough time for you to be able to, if you're hurt, you should be hurt. You're not getting off the field. There's plenty of time for you to be taken care of before the ball is spotted. If that is already happening, if you are injured once the ball is spotted, 9 times out of 10, it's probably this SEC type of injury.
Tell me, Christian, I'm glad you mentioned that's a good segue. We call this the SEC rule. I call this the SEC rule. Will it have a major impact on the way that the Big 12 plays?
I don't think we're going to have a huge impact, but I think we will see it. I think there obviously will happen, because there, like I said, in every game, every conference, even in the G5 level, we see injuries occur. Now, if we have an injury that happens in the first quarter, you're not going to think too much of it because they call the timeouts and people don't pay attention to the first half timeouts as it is. But when you get one that happens early in the third quarter and you're a fan of that team and an injury happens like that, and all of a sudden you're down to 2 timeouts and this is a close game, that's when you're going to see people strive in the social media. They're going to be heading over there and just bashing this rule. And I think that's when you're going to see it really be an issue in the Big 12. I think they needed to add some other rules too, though. I know we talked about some of these rule proposals and some things, but there was a couple other ones that they didn't talk about. What about these substitution rules, like the mass substitutions where the ref standing over the ball and you just wait for these substitutions to come in over? I mean, to me, if you want to talk about picking up the pace of play in the game of college football, which that seems like a big buzzword with every sport in the United States right now, is pace of play. If you want to find a way to get that better, you got to talk about these substitutions and figure that one out.
Yeah, or a rule where you can't tap into the opposing team's radio signal that they're giving to their quarterback would probably have been something interesting to implement moving forward for the NCAA, because that was a huge Big 12 thing this year. Schools having access.
I think you need to be charged more than a timeout for that one.
Yeah, probably. There should maybe be a fine there. I am altogether pro this rule. It's clunky because you can't exactly determine who's hurt and who's not. That is going to be a major issue, trying to decipher. I already don't trust referees. I say it a lot. If a loved one that you know or a friend that you know is a Big 12 basketball referee, they are harboring evil, dark secrets. They are not telling you something. They are rotten to their core. And I don't want to start giving these people even more power in these games. And that's what we're effectively going to do. It's going to come back to bite someone if it stays subjective. But the rule has at least a positive basis or an admirable basis to keep the SEC, mostly the SEC, from doing the fake injury thing to get an advantage. Christian, where can folks who listen to Locked On Big 12 find more of your work?
Locked On Kansas State on YouTube or wherever you're listening to your favorite podcast. And you can find it on Twitter X at Locked On K-State. We're bringing you great Wildcats coverage every single day. Basketball, football, baseball, you name it. We got you covered for everything with Wildcats.
And Christian promises me that Kansas State will win the Big 12 basketball tournament and go on a crazy Final Four run in March Madness. That's at least what he has in store, I think.
But I'm not holding my breath. Let's make that clear.
Yeah, there you go. Christian, thanks so much for joining. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.